After One Piece chapter 1079, can you say that anyone is stronger than Shanks? Because this feat he just showed might be the most impressive in the story, so much so that some people are wondering whether he's the GOAT. Because let's break this down. He starts the fight off by using Future Sight and just yoinks away Kid's feet, who we're gonna get to later. But Future Sight we already knew Shanks had. We saw he had elite observation haki in Film Red. In Volume 4 Billion, we were told he specializes in observation, but the damage this man followed that up with is insane. Because while Kid is getting slaughtered online right now, we did just see this guy defeat Big Mom last arc with the same exact Glock he pulls out in this chapter. But Shanks gets there so fast that Kid can't even pull the trigger, and then this man one-shot double kills Kid and Killer. Someone in my chat called him useless Captain Mid and Filler. These guys are getting cooked. The lead up to Shanks' attack was also hilarious because he's talking to other crew members like, hey now, that's a 3 billion berry man there, you gotta be careful. And he's also making sure that Kid is fully healthy so there's no excuses, and then just bodies him. But jokes aside, Kid and Killer are no joke. They would walk through a lot of people in this story, so it's pretty crazy that they just got decked like that. So I have to see this as Shanks' coming out party as the strongest person in the world. And I'll fully admit, it was as recently as a couple weeks ago where I was saying, I don't really get why people think Shanks is currently the strongest, because although Shanks has the impressive moments and stories, we just never saw this man go all out. So as someone who power scales heavily based off of storylines, I just didn't see the necessity for Shanks to be the strongest in the world. But now we don't have to guess, the man just showed it. Because if you compare what he just did to what we've seen from other Yonko, it's just more impressive. With Big Mom, Kid literally defeated her last arc with Law, and with Kaido, although he beat Kid and Killer multiple times, they at least put up a fight in Roof Piece. And then there's Blackbeard, who I've had at the top of my list and still think that eventually he gets there at some point. But if you just compare the fight between Blackbeard and Law and this one we just saw from Shanks and Kid, it's not even close. So outside of that, who is there really to challenge Shanks? Is it a Kainu who's been sat in his cubicle for the past 2 years and literally ended the war when Shanks pulled up? Dragon, another person I've always believed in because of that Monkey D lineage but couldn't stop Kuma from going berserk? The only other person you're gonna argue is Mihawk, and honestly I do think Mihawk's stock rises a little bit just by association. Until Mihawk actually showcases something to this level, I just think it's unfair to put him higher purely because of the narrative that he's the world's strongest swordsman. Which, don't get me wrong, I do understand that argument. I don't think haki is separated from swordsmanship. I think it's just as easy for Oda to add something into the story to explain why Shanks is stronger despite not having that title. So I think until we see otherwise, Shanks is clearly the strongest. I'm gonna do a top 30 stream during this upcoming break week, and I think for the first time there might be a unanimous number one, because Shanks actually showed out, and now the stories that you've heard, like him stopping Kaido from going to Marineford, you start to view a little differently because you've seen his strength. Where it gets a little more interesting is where he ranks all time, because I will say I do think we have some biases when it comes to the old generation and putting them on a pedestal, myself included. In my top 15 strongest all-time video, the top 5 were all legends. But now that we've seen the levels that Shanks is at, I do think there's at least a conversation. The comparison some people were making is what Roger did to Odin versus what Shanks just did to Kid and Killer. And it's an interesting comparison because young Odin versus Kid and Killer is kind of hard to compare, because that wasn't the Odin that eventually took on Kaido. That Odin knew Advance Conquers haki. The Odin that took on Roger had no idea what Roger was even doing. So could that Odin be comparable to Kid and Killer? It's kind of hard to say. But overall, I still think it's too early to say that Shanks is above some of those legends, because once again, I just lean on the narrative more. I don't think you could just look at this one encounter from Roger when he already had a deadly disease for 2 years and compare that to one attack from Shanks and use that as the whole argument. Instead, I think it's more reasonable to lean on the amount of awards Roger has stacked up throughout his entire career, at least until Shanks shows more of what he's able to do. But I think the fact that this conversation is even taking place shows how impressive Shanks was. That being said, we have to talk about the other side of this fight, the man that is getting memed to death right now. You gotta kind of feel bad for Kid. We knew he wasn't gonna win, but I was almost certain that we weren't gonna see this encounter, because we never really get to see these encounters. We're jumping out of Egghead like every other chapter, which never happens. Which does make me believe that the incident that is happening tomorrow is gonna tie back to all of this, but we'll cover that in the next section. As far as Eustass Kid goes, I'm curious, does he really change in your eyes? Because I think people that hate him will still hate him, people that like him are still gonna keep believing that eventually he gets his shine, and people like me that just don't care about him too much just don't care. Power-wise, Kid is kind of who I thought he was. I thought this moment was more so to lift up Shanks. Kid is for sure still in my top 30, but nowhere near Luffy, and as I explained in my What If Current Zoro was at Baradier video, I think he's below Zoro as well. So nothing really changes about my opinion on Kid. I do kind of feel bad that he's just constantly being used as a punching bag. To put salt on the wound, Oda even gave him an imaginary feat that Shanks just yoinked with future sight. But that imaginary feat I actually did like seeing, because as I've said before, I don't really care about Kid's powers. He's never gonna be that guy. What I want from Kid is some substance. His character's just kind of bland, there's no interesting story. This savage, ruthless guy that we were sold on in Sabaody is kind of gone, because when he just walked away from Kaido and Roof Piece and left Apu alone by the end of the arc, that's where he lost me. So to see him show no mercy and just blasting and killing a bunch of crews gave me a little bit of hope that his personality comes back, even if it was an alternate timeline that didn't happen. So Kid doesn't really change in my eyes. Instead, it's the Kid Pirates I want to talk about, because these guys folded so quick in front of Shanks, both metaphorically and physically, with the poneglyphs they gave away in seconds. I mean, they were straight up just begging, and it's even funnier because people found this old panel where they were making fun of Sanji for begging. So the Kid Pirates are down in the dumps, and as of right now, the Heart Pirates, who I absolutely killed in Wano for being cheerleaders and merchandise, are a level above them. Against Blackbeard, the Heart Pirates at least showed out and probably went down swinging. The Kid Pirates straight up just gave up and then got dusted anyways by Dory and Bragi. But to wrap things up on Kid, the final question is what exactly is next for Kid, because obviously he's not dead. And my hope is that he just full on becomes a villain. He's gone through all of this humiliation, and maybe now he's finally had enough. I think he's still gonna end up being involved in the Elbaf arc because that's where he is right now, and maybe that's the arc where at least he can be a little more interesting and be that savage, ruthless guy we were sold on. Either that or at this point he should just retire. But the next thing I want to talk about in this chapter is the great incident happening tomorrow, because this thing got way bigger than I thought. I thought the narrator was kind of capping last chapter, because in this chapter we see the Blackbeard Pirates pull up, and that's already a third party involved. We also heard from Shanks that Blackbeard left Pirate Island, so I think he's actually heading to Egghead, because think about what I talked about before. We've never jumped out of an island so many times before in an arc, so why would Oda do that unless he's trying to tie it all together? So in this case, I think Blackbeard will show up, which means Garp will follow back as well, and Shanks is probably going to the same place. If you want to talk about a game-changing great incident, that's how it gets there. Last chapter, a lot of people discussed Dragon and potentially the Grand Fleet showing up, but personally, I just didn't think it was that logical, because Dragon we just saw was in Kamabaka Kingdom, so it'd be pretty crazy for him to get all the way to Egghead in one day. The Grand Fleet, on the other hand, don't really have a reason to show up. Luffy did pretty much die in Wano, but then he became okay again, so his Viva card came back. So I think there needs to be another reason for them to show up, because Luffy's not in danger. Maybe like they want to celebrate him becoming a Yonko or something. I just need a logical explanation of some sort for them to get there, because I'd love for them to show up and turn this thing into a historical event. On the Blackbeard side though, I do want to mention a theory I had pretty early on, which is Kuzan showing up. And initially my idea was more connected to this Enies Lobby reunion of like Rob Lucci being there and Robin being there, and we're talking about Saul. And now that pretty much another Buster call is happening, it could be a nice way for Kuzan to right his wrongs. But then once the Garp plotline happened, I felt like Kuzan should be involved there, because there could be a sword thing going on with Kobe and Law. But maybe it just all leads to one place, and Egghead is a much bigger arc than anything we imagined. Either way, I'm hyped for what comes next, and this chapter was an absolute banger. If you want more content, check out my new video about the Rocks Pirates.